Okay, well, thank you for having me. To begin with, my name is Ryan. Today I am going to talk about Playwright, which some of you may know about, some of you may not, but hopefully you find out something interesting during this talk. But first of all, about me. Like I said, I am Ryan. I am a software tester and have been for about 10 years now. I live in Norwich, so not a million miles away from you guys, just down the A11. And I am the founder of How QA, which is a test consultancy startup. So we just work with companies providing software testing support and consultancy, mostly for other small businesses and startups. So I like coffee. I like cats. I have 3 cats. I like cricket, which is great at the moment because we have some cricket on TV. And I like cognac, or the 4 C's. As nobody's calling them. And dislikes. I really don't like not having coffee. So I try to keep up on the coffee. That's probably enough about me. Let's talk about Playwright. So first of all, what is Playwright? So this is taken straight from their GitHub repo. It says Playwright is a Node.js library to automate Chromium, Firefox, and WebKit with a single API. Playwright is built to enable cross-browser web automation that is evergreen, capable, reliable, and fast. Okay, lots of talk, but maybe we can dive in a bit further and see what that actually means, and understand a bit about what Playwright does and how it works. So before I start, I'm going to I've got two caveats. First of all, I am not a JavaScript or Node.js expert. Secondly, I'm not even a Playwright expert, which is probably 2 things you don't necessarily want to hear from someone giving a Playwright talk at a JavaScript and Node.js meetup. But what I am is someone who's quite curious about new libraries, and I like to understand what's around, so that if I do have a need for a new automation library, that I'm aware of what's about and I can make a selection accordingly. So back to Playwright. So some of you who are familiar with web automation testing from a JavaScript perspective might be thinking, why do we need another JavaScript UI automation library? And that's quite a good question, because actually, if you're familiar with JavaScript, you are spoilt for choice with the amount of UI automation frameworks available. So you have things like Nightwatch, Puppeteer, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute, Protractor, Cypress, which is very popular at the moment, of course Selenium, which has been around for a long time, and things like WebdriverIO, which are built on top of Selenium. And that's just to name a few. There are others as well. So these are some of the more popular options. So why do we need Playwright? Why do we need another library? Well, let's talk Playwright. So as an overview, so it actually started as a fork of Puppeteer. So Puppeteer is a end-to-end web automation library. It was developed by a group of people at Google, and subsequently those people left Google and joined Microsoft. So they forked Puppeteer and created Playwright. So actually Playwright and Puppeteer very, very similar. They've come from the same origins, and they're actually maintained, well, the team that maintain Playwright are the original Puppeteer team. So at the moment, they're very, very similar. It'll be interesting to see in the future what happens, whether they go off in their different directions, what are the sort of the ethos and the theory and the ideas behind Playwright and Puppeteer. As I just mentioned, it's supported by the Puppeteer team, who now work at Microsoft. So it's got some pretty heavy backing there. It's completely open sourced. It's available to download via NPM. It's got just over 21,000 stars on GitHub currently, so it's getting pretty popular. So it started as a Node library. So obviously, being a Node meetup, we'll be talking about this a bit further. But it's worth mentioning that even though it started as a Node library, it now already has language bindings for Java, Python, C#, and even Go as well. So it's branched out quite considerably. There are a number of different options, number of different language bindings now, which is great for languages like Python, where you've sort of typically been limited to C#, to Selenium. So version 1 of Playwright was released in May 2020. So this is version 1 of the Node JavaScript version. So it's fairly new comparatively speaking. So this is a typical Playwright script. So it's fairly similar in sense to, like I said, if you've used Puppeteer before, you'll see some similarities. It's all asynchronous, and it's relatively similar in style to things like Cypress and Selenium. It's the same kind of process, being able to navigate to a page, select elements on that page, enter details, press buttons and that sort of thing. So it's obviously typically designed as a test automation tool for those sort of end-to-end web processes. So just if I show you, this is a slightly more complicated version. So here we've got the go-to command that we saw in the previous slide to navigate to a particular web page. But in this instance, we've also got the command to fill in a particular field and to use the keyboard to press specific keys. If we compare that to something like Selenium WebDriver, like I said, it's not a million miles away. Again, we have the mechanism to navigate to a particular web page and also find elements and enter information into those and press keys. Similarly, something like Cypress, this is a bit of a cut down one. Again, we use cy.visit to navigate to a page. In this instance, we've also got the screenshot in there, which is available in Playwright as well. So I will go back to those slides in a minute once I've explained some of the core features of Playwright. So first of all, Playwright describes itself as cross-browser. And what it means by that is it's out of the box, gives you the ability to run your web automation scripts on a number of different browsers, including WebKit, which is used for Safari, Firefox, obviously, and the Chromium browser, which is the engine for obviously Google Chrome, but also Microsoft Edge as well. And the great thing about Playwright is that it downloads these engines for you as part of the install. So you don't have to worry about having these drivers, these engines installed locally on your machine. When you another slide. When you install Playwright, it's going to automatically download Chromium and Firefox and WebKit for you. And like I said, that means regardless of whether you're running on Mac, Windows, Linux, you've got the ability to run your tests on any of those, using any of those engines. You don't have to download them specifically. Go back to Rails. Secondly, it supports, it's got support for multi-page tabs and iframes, which is a limitation of some of the other tools such as Cypress, which is very much focused on single page automation. Playwright, on the other hand, provides something called context, which allow you to open up multiple tabs and multiple pages and even multiple iframes in a single test. The way that contexts work is they allow you to launch the browser one time and then generate context, individual unique context as part of that browser instance. So if you wanted to open multiple pages, you can do that without having to open multiple instances of the browser. A single browser and multiple contexts underneath that. And I can show you an example in a minute. And what this does is this, not only does this mean you can open multiple pages within a single test, but it also makes things quicker because you can reuse your browser instances and launch as many contexts as you want. And these contexts are very quick to launch and to close. Auto waiting. So if any of you are automation testers, you would probably have felt the pain of having to wait for elements to appear on a page. And there's obviously hundreds of articles around how to make your tests less flaky and what waiting strategy should you use. There's lots of different options. The great thing about a tool like Playwright is you don't have to worry about any of them. So it's got an auto wait feature. So if it knows it has to click on an element, it will wait for that element to appear, and it will keep trying until that element appears. You can obviously set timeouts on that if you don't want it to wait indefinitely. But again, that just makes tests a bit more robust, less flaky, and means you don't have to worry about putting sleeps in your automated tests. So Playwright has got its own test runner. So it's part of a separate library called Playwright Test. And that allows you to use the sort of it and describe features you might be familiar with from test runners such as Mocha and Jest. But it also, not only can you use Playwright Test, it does also support Mocha, Jest, and Jasmine as well. So unlike tools like Cypress, where you are restricted to using Mocha, you do, like Selenium here, you do have the ability to sort of pick and choose your the test runner that suits your purpose or that you're most familiar with. Or you can go back to the Playwright test runner. The same goes for assertions as well. So again, if you want to use things like Chai, you can import Chai and use Chai alongside your Playwright tests. It does also have built-in assertions as well. Auto element detection. So what I mean by this is when you're writing your tests, Playwright has the ability to understand what type of element you're trying to find based on the text you specify. So if I go back to my example here, so where in this instance here, where I want to fill in a particular element here, so I want to fill in an element called new to do, and I want to enter the text explore Playwright in that element. What Playwright allows me to do, or what Playwright's clever enough to kind of understand what type of element you're trying to look for based on the text you input there. So if you put slashes in, it recognizes that you're probably looking for an XPath. So you don't need to explicitly specify that you're looking for an XPath. If you put div, for example, my understanding you're looking for a CSS element or something like that. So again, you don't have to explicitly specify that your particular element here is an XPath, for example. You can also, with other element types, tell it that it's a particular name. You can do things like page fill name equals submit, or CSS equals div, whatever it is, or XPath equals followed by your XPath, but you don't have to explicitly do that in many of the scenarios. You can also chain elements as well. So if you're looking for a particular element within a div, you can specify your div and then specify an element inside that. So you, in a single command, you can chain and search for elements a bit deeper inside the DOM. The Playwright CLI is a relatively new feature. So it was a completely separate library. I believe it's now merged into the Playwright library itself. So there's nothing else to install. And it's a code generation tool. And it's a great way to get to know Playwright and understand how it works and understand how it creates tests. And what it allows you to do is, via the command line, specify a endpoint you want to hit, a web page, specify that you want to do code generation, and it will open up the terminal for you, and it will record everything you do on that website. So you can log in and it will record and generate a Playwright test for you. You can then copy that into your IDE, and then you can run that as a Playwright test. You can remove those hard-coded text if you want to, of course, but it's a great way of getting started with Playwright to understand exactly how it's generating tests and how to click on elements and how to enter text and how it's finding those elements using how it's finding those elements in the DOM. So it's a really great feature. Interestingly, Cypress have just released their own playground. I can't remember what they call it now, with a similar feature that you can now generate Cypress tests like that. Again, this is a popular feature in Cypress, but as what I call a modern test automation tool, where we have now a lot of single page applications. Applications are no longer static. There's always things going on behind the scenes. There's lots of HTTP requests. Well, Playwright gives you the ability to intercept those requests and even mock them out. So this is a great feature if you want to test what happens if your web application receives the wrong information. So what happens if it receives a status 404 or 500 instead of 200? So now you can do that within your test, your web automated test. in a single test, you can mock out your backend, you can intercept a particular network event, and you can return something like a 500 status or particular data that you want to generate. That's a great way of testing what happens if your web application receives something that is not necessarily expecting to receive. File upload and file download support. Again, a lot of the tools that I've mentioned previously, the ability to upload and download files and test that process is limited. This is supported out of the box with Playwright. So there's no need to look at third-party libraries or anything. Again, you can do this directly from your tests and manage your file upload, file download style tests. Mobile device emulation. So one of the limitations, which I'll mention in a minute, is that you can't run tests on mobile apps. So there's no support for iOS, Android app testing. But what you can do is emulate mobile devices. So if you want to see how your particular application runs on a particular screen size, mobile screen size, or iPhone 11, for example, screen size, you can set all that up, geolocation, so you can run your tests as if you're running it on a mobile. But like I said, you can't test mobile apps directly. The great thing about this is, as I mentioned earlier, you can generate context as part of your test. So you can generate two separate contexts. So I could generate a context for a mobile device emulation and a context for a normal web browser, Chromium frame. All again within my same test, two separate contexts running on the same driver, the same engine, but different contexts that I can interact with separately and close down independently as well. Built-in assertion. So I mentioned earlier that you can integrate this with Chai, which is probably the most popular assertion library, but it does have its own built-in assertions as well. So you can use sort of standard expect element contains or expect a particular button to be disabled or enabled for that sort of thing, and that's all built in. So that's some of the core features. Now, some of the limitations. So there's not currently any API support as such. You can't run any API tests in the same way that you can on tools like Cypress, and obviously there's plenty of API specific tools, Postman or specific libraries. At the moment, you'd have to combine this with a library, HTTP library, to call an API endpoint. So, as I mentioned earlier, there's no mobile app support, so you can't run Playwright on mobile apps like you can with Appium. And I put yet here because I noticed there is a GitHub issue that they're trying to get some momentum on for a minute at the moment. So it looks like the plans are, if there's enough appetite for it, that they will look to support mobile apps in the future, which will be great because there are currently limited libraries, limited tools which allow you to do that. So having another one in the market will be great, especially if it allows you to do mobile apps and web apps, all using the same tool. It doesn't support all browsers. So I mentioned earlier that that Playwright describes itself as a cross-browser library, which it is. It supports modern browsers in terms of Chromium, Firefox and Safari via WebKit. It doesn't support IE. It doesn't support Opera. I know lots of people still use IE. Lots of companies still use IE. So again, it's just something to consider when selecting the tool that you pick a tool that allows you to test on the browsers that you need to, the application is going to be used in. It's a new kid on the block. So as I say, version 1 was released in May. So 2020 has been its kind of first year. That means there's limited documentation. Now, the Playwright documentation itself is actually really good. There's lots of information there. Yeah, and it's all covered. What I mean by limited documentation is currently there aren't a lot of articles on platforms like Medium, or there's not lots of stuff on Stack Overflow about issues with Playwright. So if you're using a tool like Selenium or WebdriverIO or even Cypress, there's so much information, so many out there that it's often the answer to your problems is out there. It's not quite like that with Playwright yet. What I have found is lots of the Puppeteer issues are very similar. So you can always search for Puppeteer issues and you might find a solution there. But currently there are fewer how-to guides and videos and that sort of thing. And again, because it's quite new, there is a lack of support for sort of cross-browser tools such as Browser Stack and Source Labs. So it's not currently possible to run your Playwright tests using these tools. I suspect that will change fairly rapidly, and in the future, I'd expect you to be able to use Playwright with tools like Browser Stack and Source Labs to cover sort of your cross-browser testing. One thing you can do before I get to questions, when we're talking about cross-browser testing, one feature which they have provided is the ability to run your tests across multiple browsers within a single test. So for example, here I have a single script which just navigates, this is taken directly from that documentation, by the way, which just navigates to this endpoint and takes a screenshot. But what you can do, as we saw in the previous example briefly, is you can specify your browser and launch your browser. And then you can navigate to your web page. What you can also do is specify in a for loop, you can specify multiple browsers. So you could now run your single test on each of these browsers, and it will just leap through, run the test on each browser and take a screenshot on for each browser. So for example, I haven't run this since I put it in, but that should hopefully work. So one thing I should mention here is, so you can see that it's currently taking screenshots. So it's done Chromium. It should leap through and do the rest. It's done Firefox there. There you go, and it's just completed the WebKit one as well. So you can see that nothing really happened there. I can prove that we've taken these screenshots for each of my browser, so it has worked. But what's actually happened is that Playwright runs in headless mode by default. So you don't see anything at all. It's all running headlessly, and that's as a way for performance purposes, so we're not having to load up the full browser. You can obviously run in head full mode as well. So in this example I had previously, where I'm launching Chrome, I can specify that I want to run in headless mode, in which case that would launch my full browser. The other thing you can do in here as well, there are many options, but you can also, which is great for debugging, is you can specify slow-mo, so you can actually slow down your browser interaction. Like I said, that's great for debugging, to actually see what's going on, especially if your test is very short. These tests are only taking seconds to run, so it's great to be able to slow that down to see what's really happening. So, which brings me to any questions?
Thanks very much. That was really interesting. So if anyone wants to ask a question, probably, well, you could type it in the chat window, or I think you can unmute yourself if you want to. It might be a bit chaotic. We can see how it goes. I'll tell you what, let's start with the question. I've got a couple of questions, and just to get us going, and then I'll hand over to everyone else. You showed us specifying browsers, but can you specify the actual version of the browser as well? Could I download a really obscure version of Firefox and run the tests against that?
No, I don't think you can. I think it's driven by the engine that it right. Downloads.
It's always the latest, and presumably extends to Edge as well, given it is Microsoft running it.
Yeah, so it does, but it runs it as part of because new Edge is Chromium.
Yeah.
It launches that through the Chromium driver.
Right.
So it uses the same driver as it would use for Chrome. So in a roundabout way, it does support Edge, Chrome, Firefox, and WebKit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But because Chrome and Edge are using the same engine, essentially. And
have you had any issues with like certain frameworks, like doing single page apps and things like that? Have you tried it with like a React app or an Angular app, or that kind of thing?
I've only tried it on a React app. I haven't tried it on Angular. So my experience, it's been okay. It's very much marketing itself in the same way that that Cypress does in a modern framework, a package for sort of modern web development. So it's very much marketing itself as this is a tool for applications built things like Angular and React, and that's why I think it's got the ability to do things like intercept sort of requests and things like that. One thing I didn't mention in here, it's got sort of support for Shadow DOM as well. So again, it's those kind of features that make it maybe a bit more usable for modern apps compared to kind of traditional Selenium.
Okay, Anthony's just asked a question on the chat to DM to me, which I've written down as well, which was around screenshot diffing. Could it give you an output of a diff for the screenshots, but say for between two browsers?
No, not out of the box. So you're talking about doing comparing screenshots,
either by browser or as Anthony says, by regression. Like if
you not out of the box. So you can take screenshots and you can store them absolutely fine, but it won't do that comparison. You'll have to use something like obviously there's several libraries out, Percy and things like that, which right. You can use. There's a few which is paid for, I think, but there are a few free ones as well.
Okay.
Just the ability to screenshot at the moment. You can't do
compare DOMs and things, because you can save the DOM and compare it to the DOM you're expecting, or is that more kind of React unit testing kind of?
Yeah, I don't think you can. I haven't come across that. Okay. Yeah, I've got a feeling, I keep mentioning Cypress, but I've got a feeling Cypress you can essentially take a copy of the DOM and compare. But I haven't come across that in Playwright.
Okay, thanks. I've got another question coming in through our chat. I will open it up to voice in a minute. Sorry, someone has asked, Soren has asked, have you tried running it on a Raspberry Pi? And he says that he tried to install it and it can't run on their examples apparently on the Raspberry Pi. If you come across
really? No, I haven't at all. Is that the I wonder if any of the other versions, if you can run the Python one on there at all. I don't know.
The 3B version, he says.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, I haven't tried. That's an
Yeah.
interesting one.
Yeah.
I have to do a bit of Google about that.
Yeah.
Googling about that.
All right, thanks. Does anyone have any questions they want to ask verbally?
Hi, Ryan. Yeah,
Hello.
I have one. First of all, very good presentation. I have
Thank
a question about support for Electron. I see that it has been recently added. I wonder if you used the Playwright with Electron.
I saw that too. No, I haven't at all. So I've only recently started my kind of Playwright journey, and it's something that I'm kind of exploring more and more. I think it's going to get more popular this year as an option. But no, I haven't used it, but I definitely will. I definitely will try it.
Perfect.
So I'm making notes as well.
Yeah, that could be interesting as well. Yeah, that could be interesting from my point of view as well. Any other questions from anyone else?
Yeah, I'd like to ask a question. Are you aware of any blogs maybe from Microsoft where they announced this, or engineering blog where they said this is why we've done it? So it's kind of like the design decision from the team, why they've done it, because there's obviously, as you said, there's a lot of libraries. So kind of what is the strategy?
I have seen, I'll have to dig it out. I know that, so the documentation on the Playwright website's pretty good, and they've got some information on sort of why Playwright, which might be quite useful for you. I'd certainly read an article. So I first heard about Playwright probably about this time last year, when it was still in a 0. such and such versions, and I know there was lots of talk then about what was the kind of ethos behind it and why. And one of the things that they certainly mentioned a lot was the ability to sort of move. One of the benefits over Puppeteer was the implementing the cross browser. So Puppeteer was Chrome only. So they got that in pretty quickly. But I don't know specifically any which mentioned kind of why beyond what's written in the documentation.
Okay, thanks. All right, we've probably got time for another question or two. Anyone got any more questions?
Yeah, I have another one. Sorry, Ryan, what's your favorite testing library for this end-to-end testing? What do you prefer?
So I like. I think I don't know if anyone's used Cypress here. So Cypress, I think, is probably one of the nicest libraries to use in terms of just setup. It's super quick to set up. And you get really nice features like the ability to interact with the DOM through your testing. We've got the Cypress runner, which I think is a really cool feature, and there's just nothing like it out there. So I think in terms of usability and ease of use, Cypress. The only, I think comparatively, tools like Playwright seem to come pretty close in terms of features. The advantage of something like Playwright is it isn't as opinionated. So obviously with Cypress, you're forced to use mocker and sort of chai-like assertions, which is all built in as part of Cypress, which is great, as I say, for ease of use, but it makes it a bit more difficult to kind of integrate that with if you wanted to use a different test runner. So Cypress is probably the nicest and easiest, most user-friendly to use, in my experience.
Okay, thanks. One last question, if anyone's got one, and then we'll let Ryan get to his dinner. Anyone? Okay. All right, well, thank you so much. It's been a really good talk, and I was certainly looking forward to having a little play with Playwright. It looks great. So thanks, everyone. Thanks for your questions too.
Thank you very much.
We'll be back next month, hopefully. So see you soon.